and yet what we see is very often adjusted according to our created consciousness. How we have constructed ourselves dictates what we perceive on the physical, how we interpret it. With greater awareness we can interpret things more so as they actually are, and not what they appear to be. A devout religious person and a patriot will always perceive the world through the filters of these ideas. They are like filters, ideas that are akin to editing software, that edit and change the world in accordance with the ideas that make up the created mind of the individual. For such a person, they can never see how the governments are deliberately poisoning and killing their people. They can never see how all religions are a control factor that keep people trapped in creation through fear and subconscious manipulation. Whereas an individual who was not clinging onto these ideas, and therefore these ideas less project the filters that obscure what is plain to see, would be aware of the corruption, the lethal Wi-Fi and vaccinations, the depopulation agenda, and the controlling hand of religions. For these two individuals, were they to enter a new experience, it would be filtered according to their created consciousness, and edited to a degree, even though they are seeing the same thing. They would be experiencing it very differently. The created consciousness is what we have developed over the lifetimes we have been here, the mind and emotional bodies of the self, and however we have constructed it, for yes, its construction and experiences generated were necessary to afford us experiences in the simulator. This construction is what filters us from perceiving the is. For this is why we are in the simulator, to recognize this true reality of the is, and return to what we are already at this very moment, a state of being that is filtered and obscured by the created consciousness of the created selves we have placed here in creation. So we wouldn't be expanding in our spirituality, as is often expressed by spiritual teachers and paths. We are in fact deconstructing what we have constructed. We required that we generate experiences, that we have references and comparisons to relate to when we walk into new experiences, and at a certain point we qualify ourselves for the next step. The next step being a recognition of what we are, beings of real light with the ease. A process of awareness that will have us experience parts of creation, parts of ourselves effectively, that we never have experienced before, and ultimately the real universes. To get there, we now must deconstruct. We must identify the ideas and agreements, all that which makes up our current created consciousness, and start to release them. As we let them go, the filters of our created selves begin to diminish, and we see more. The devout Christian and patriot now begins to recognize the reality of religions and the tyranny of the death cult, which is governments, and he decides to release these ideas. Releasing these rigid subconscious concepts has filters removed, allows that he sees more of himself. He will have experiences that afford him a greater view, confirmations of the corruptions that are prevalent on this planet. He is more aware now. He has released agreements and ideas that have kept his state of being static for who knows how many lifetimes. His experience always reflecting that which makes up his constructed self, his patriotism and religious convictions. He, like everybody else, is awareness. He is. He encapsulates this isness. All that he needs to be aware of what he is within himself. And as he releases these old, outdated concepts that have held him in patterns of perpetual experience, he sees more of himself. He becomes more aware. Should this process continue, the individual works through themselves, confronts everything they have constructed of their personal created self, and decides to release them. This process, reaching the inevitable conclusion of being free of the created self, the mind and emotions, and not bound by the experiences that are generating in accordance with their construction, the endless lifetimes based on the parameters of their design. For the mental body simply is a storehouse for references, like a library of books, or a case full of video recordings. The emotional self has categorized all these books as being either good or bad. It has labeled them such, and consequently clings to them, likes to read them over and over. As such, the same movies will always be playing, the same experiences always re-establishing each lifetime, as the mind is simply the storehouse, and the emotional self chooses the movie to be played out in accordance with its preferences. The physical life level is the stadium, or the movie screen, which then the experience is played out, or the emotionally preferred movie. To get beyond this then has us not destroy the library or the movie collection, as the references can be useful as comparative tools, but rather we leave the books where they are and close the video cabinet. Success in this decided upon endeavour and the intent to complete our process has us experience more of the created simulator, more of our created selves, in fact, into the imaginative, intuitive, subconscious part of ourselves. The ethereal level and the last filter, the last part of our created selves, before we stand in our true being state. The created vehicle just being a mechanical machine, realistically, which simply creates experiences. It isn't actually real, and it isn't actually who we are. It's just a created vehicle that we utilize to eventually recognize who we really are. And so, what inhabits the created physical self is the real you, that is an isness, and stands in the true reality. What oversees the personally created self is the real you, and moves it along through its experiences, nudging it a few steps at a time, trying to get it to experience more that will facilitate greater awareness, until the time comes when the real you decides to attempt to recognize the is, to recognize itself. The real you is encased in the created self, and becomes somewhat lost in its own creation and generated experiences. It begins to think that what it has created is what it is. But within the illusion of its creation, the real you chooses at a certain point to recognize itself, and a connection between the real self operating the created self and the created self is made. The new you song is the connection and the state of being isness, which can be assumed while still in creation. This being isness, a state that must be decided, a state that is most conducive to recognize the is, to recognize ourselves, while still having the created self in creation. Something that is decided then, and you can only decide to be the isness that you actually are, if you are doing so from a position of not being so, from the position of your creation. If one has completely deconstructed the created self and decides this, and to recognize themselves as they really are, as a being of light with the ears, then nothing binds them to creation. And if they have recognized the true reality, utilizing to good effect all their creational experience references, then there is no point in being isness while still encased in a created mechanical experience generating vehicle. For now the individual can stand with the ease. The created self and the simulator it is in has served its purpose, and is no longer required. The expansion into the is continues. We deconstructed the creation, and now are with the endless isness. But there is always more to see and be, and so we continue on, if we so choose, to expand further into it, an expansion into what it already is, a completeness, so we don't go anywhere. The layers of the isness fall away as we experience a greater awareness and being of it and with it.